So I just want to point you back to the front of the research that you've been working on. Much of this you've already turned in, and this is where you did all of the necessary research to understand what was happening in the industry using the IBIS World Report, what's happening in the company, looking at the Market Line Advantage Report and the company website, and doing other online investigation. You've summarized that and you've been able to create a SWOT matrix. And out of that, you've highlighted the things that you think are most critical moving forward for the company to be successful, whether that's our case company Tesla or whether that's the specific company that you are studying. So we're going to move into the last phase. So we've done external analysis, internal analysis, and now we're working on implementation. And we need to focus our efforts and we need to be able to really start or pursue our new idea or ideas. And we need to understand what those are. And so at this point, you've been able to communicate the current strategy, the current mission and vision and core values. You are working on the backside, and so you might restate that current strategy just so we can contrast it. That's really helpful. The current business model that you've already worked on. We're going to talk a little bit about a TOWS matrix, MAO models. We're going to make a recommendation on what and why. And it's helpful if you use the business model canvas to highlight any of those unique changes. And then we're going to look at kind of what happens to stakeholders, how they're impacted. So, excuse me for a moment. We are looking at the stakeholder map, and you'll have built one of those already as well, but we want to think about how stakeholders may be impacted by your recommendations. So we'll talk a little bit through that. What resources might be needed beyond financial resources? So in project management, we think in terms of the space and technology and people on the team that we need. That helps us to facilitate a budget. So the financial uh, investment that needs to be made. And then a Gantt timeline is just a timeline that shows tasks happening in their kind of sequence or order. It can be done right on a Excel sheet, but you can look up Gantt timelines and you'll want to build one to have just a rough schedule. So schedule, budget, and kind of core resources. And then you have to clarify in a project what you're trying to accomplish, what will happen if we're successful. So you'll make a recommendation, and that recommendation we should be able to test to see if we got where we wanted. And you should have 2 to 5 with very specific measurable goals. I like to use the acronym SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and there's a time frame associated when those targets would be reached. And so you'll need to be clear on what you expect. For example, what will the return on investment be? So we'll talk through those briefly. You may recall me showing you this business model canvas. This one's laid out with the kinds of questions you answer in each area, and you've used the tool before. And then you may require or remember that I showed you one from Netflix. It's a bit dated, and you could look through it and you'd figure that out pretty quickly because it's not as focused on their even creation of content where they are today. And I shared kind of 3 iterations at least, from DVDs to streaming to content creators that they've gone through, and this is kind of more in the middle. What I've done here, and by the way, this you could find this online. I found it as a Word document so that I could go in and type into it. You'll have each of the categories, and then below it, some things I've typed in to show some of the differences. So if I was describing Netflix from where they were in the last one to where they are now, and trying to do that in advance, we might talk about some of the key partners being production houses over purchase content from TV stations and movie studios over here, and key partners and key activities. We're now going to be creating our own content, documentaries, series, movies, short series, etc. Some of the key resources to do that are our existing platform, our AI that makes recommendations, the curated purchase library we already have, and our own new created content, Netflix originals, if you will. The value proposition is that you get original content along with the curated content from others that we have been providing up to this point. The customer relationship is really based on the number of devices you want to play simultaneous, and content that is curated globally. So they're in about 190 something countries with approximately 200 in the world. They're one of the most global companies that you can actually study. Channels. It's all mobile and smart TVs, mobile devices, computers, digital mainly. There are still some DVD rentals that go on. You might want to offer travelers a global package in the future. This is a little note that I made, something that I think would be helpful as someone who travels outside the US. When I travel, I can't use my account because it's linked to being inside the US. And then customer segments. So they've got single devices to 4+ devices. It only works in your country where you have membership, but most countries of the world you can purchase a membership. And so down the road, again, maybe they would add a global traveler or the international community, so you can cross international boundaries and still use it, at least in some areas. Cost structure now includes creating that content, but it also then they let the customer determine what to continue to spend on. So if they build something and season one goes phenomenal, then season two, three, are built out. If season one is minimally or poorly received, then they don't bother to continue to invest in that, much like TV stations do or did in the past. And there's less contracting as a result with outside providers, which means lower costs. But there's been increased competition between YouTube and Hulu and Disney Plus, both of which are owned by Disney. In the last two, YouTube owned by Google, and Amazon having its Prime. There's been a lot more competition. And so if you have a favorited show like Friends, suddenly there's competition over who's going to pay enough to get that, almost like who's going to pay to feature NFL games or the Super Bowl. And then revenue streams are based on streaming levels and based on the number of devices. And other than memberships, there might be a little ad spend, but there's very little other revenue streams, where Hulu does have quite a bit of ad spend revenue by comparison. And so that's a choice in their business model. Can't do all things, and so you're going to have to choose what you will and won't do. So TOWS matrix takes use of the SWOT. And in the SWOT analysis, you should very clearly highlight, bold, make stand out those core things. And then minimally, I would say put 2 strengths, 2 weaknesses, 2 opportunities, 2 threats. Usually I build it with 3 in each category. And from that, you can begin to combine things. I usually number them. So maybe strength 1 with opportunity number 2. And that's going to mate up in this first box of using strengths to take advantage of an opportunity. And I can come up with an aggressive strategy, an approach to really take advantage of who we are and take the lead with our competition. If I'm having to address a weakness to take advantage of an opportunity, we call that a turnaround strategy. If we're taking our strengths to address a threat that we see, a diversification strategy. And finally, if we're having to overcome a weakness and address a threat, a defensive strategy. And the bias is to orient towards these kinds of aggressive strategies. I will tell you, they're not always the best. So what the TOWS does is get you to create at least one. So this is your challenge, to create at least one strategy that you think is viable in each of those four quadrants. And so here's an example of a TOWS matrix for Harley Davidson. Some of their strengths are their brand, the range of products, their market share, particularly in North America, and customer loyalty. Some of their weaknesses, global brand awareness, struggling amongst their leadership. If you were to look at the leadership evaluation, and there's been a lot of transitions and turnover during the time of the case that we were looking at it. There's some opportunities in the international market in female riders and new product lines, including non-manufacturing opportunities such as the Harley Davidson financing, and then some threats, weakening economy. In fact, the case ends right as we're about to go into a global recession. The other international manufacturers, so competition, and the ideal market for them is aging, and that makes the future ability to sell the number of bikes they have in question. And you can pause it here and you could look at a range of strategies that, in this case, three students, Johanna, Brett, and Tyler, were able to come up with, thinking about that mix of SWOT findings from all the research, the front side of the poster, or what's a PowerPoint presentation for you, and then they can begin to evaluate and compare those ideas. So again, I always encourage you to pause it if you want to take a moment and look at something, but you would develop a TOWS matrix with multiple ideas before you've settled on your final recommendation. And then to go a step further, this one's actually using a different company. It's Callaway. It's called a MAU model, MAU. It stands for multi-attribute utility model. I don't care that you remember that fancy name. I could easily put a fourth, so there's space to put a fourth one here. But we looked and we said, okay, what happens if they pursue market segmentation, growing their geographic footprint as a golf club manufacturer, Callaway? What if they diversify into the golf ball market, which they've done? And what if they highlight building out similar equipment to what they already have for women and the youth market, a growing share of golfers at the time that we were looking at the company? And so you have, these are actually strategies that could come from that TOWS matrix. These are the criteria by which we want to compare strategies. And you don't have to use my set of criteria, but they're helpful. And I think you'll find many of them cross industries. So brand image and reputation is important. And how's that going to be impacted by the strategy? What's the level of innovation needed? And how much knowledge and new resources do we need? What's the potential profitability? How much, down here, capital required, how much do we have to put in to reach that potential? So if I can make a lot and spend little, that's like the perfect world, right? But if I'm spending a lot to make a little, I want to note that. How much market share could we gain? And is this a market that's on a BCG matrix, for example, we'd put in a high growth area? And what kind of customer service capabilities do we need? So you can alter the criteria based on what makes sense in your industry a little bit, but there should be something around how it's going to impact the image of the company, its potential financial impact, both in terms of revenue and cost, and what is necessary actually to carry this out. Is this a difficult strategy to do? Or is it a more simple strategy compared to the others? And you can rate each or within the strategy, and you can weight each in what you think is more important. So the things that are rated 3, now I only allow ratings of 1 to 3. So 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, and 3 are the options, and 3 means really important, 1 means less important.